Hey top drivers, today we'll break down rolling resistance in sim racing, what it is, how setup adjustments, particularly toe and tire pressure, affect it, and how it has been implemented in major sim racing titles. Rolling resistance is one of the forces that significantly impact a vehicle's performance, especially in motorsport. It's a force that opposes the motion of the tire and, as a result, the motion of the car itself. This resistance is caused by hysteresis, the cyclic deformation the tire undergoes as it interacts with the track surface. This phenomenon is expressed through the rolling resistance coefficient, a value that changes based on multiple factors, including tire type and the vehicle's operating conditions. Let's take a closer look at how rolling resistance works. It primarily depends on two factors. The first is tire deformation. When the tread makes contact with the asphalt and its micro-imperfections, the carcass deforms and then returns to its original shape once the contact ends. The second factor is aerodynamic and inertial forces, but we won't be covering those in this video. However, it's important to keep in mind that while aerodynamic drag becomes dominant at high speeds, rolling resistance plays a much bigger role at medium to low speeds. We mentioned that rolling resistance is expressed through the rolling resistance coefficient CR. In racing cars, this coefficient is very low, around 0.005, whereas in road cars, it's significantly higher, typically around 0.03. The force of rolling resistance is calculated using the following formula. FR equals CR times W, where CR is the rolling resistance coefficient, W is the weight of the vehicle in newtons. Let's take a practical example using the McLaren 720S GT3 Evo, a car with an approximate weight of 1,283 kilograms. To determine the force with which the vehicle presses against the road surface, we multiply this value by 9.81, which represents Earth's gravitational acceleration in meters per second squared. W equals 1,283 times 9.81 equals 12,588.443 newtons. Now let's analyze weight distribution. The McLaren 720S GT3 Evo has 58% of its weight on the front axle and 42% on the rear axle. With a simple calculation, we can break down the total weight between the two axles. If we go back to the original formula and multiply the rolling resistance coefficient, CR equals 0.005, a typical value for race cars, by the weight on each axle, we obtain the rolling resistance force acting on each tire, both front and rear. Finally, multiplying the result by 2 gives us the total rolling resistance of the entire vehicle. However, there's an important factor to consider: the effect of toe, both front and rear, on rolling resistance. Toe, whether positive or negative, refers to the angle at which the wheels are positioned relative to the car's longitudinal axis. Toe plays a crucial role in determining rolling efficiency and tire friction. When the wheels are set at an angle other than 0, the tires experience a slight slip angle, meaning they scrub against the track surface. This leads to an inevitable increase in rolling resistance. Let's now break down the main effects of toe on rolling resistance. Increased rolling resistance. Any toe angle, whether positive or negative, introduces a slip angle even when driving in a straight line. This results in energy loss due to friction and increased heat dissipation. Reduced top speed. Since a portion of the available energy is lost as heat, the car's top speed decreases slightly compared to a setup with neutral toe. Higher tire temperatures. The extra friction between the rubber and the asphalt caused by a non-zero toe angle leads to higher tire temperatures. This can alter internal tire pressure and affect the car's handling dynamics. Let's look at a specific example. Suppose we set up the front toe at negative 0.05 degrees, toe out, and the rear toe at positive 0.03 degrees, toe in. Even though these values are relatively small, we can quantify their effect on rolling resistance. Additional rolling resistance at the front, 11.4 newtons. Additional rolling resistance at the rear, 8.36 newtons. Total additional rolling resistance due to toe, 19.72 newtons. As a result, the total rolling resistance of the McLaren 720S GT3 Evo, which was originally 62.92 newtons, increases to 82.74 newtons once toe is factored in. We also mentioned that an increase in toe leads to higher tire temperatures, as the energy dissipated through rolling resistance is converted into heat. The power dissipated, P, can be calculated using the formula P equals Fr times V, where Fr is the rolling resistance force, V is the vehicle's speed. Using the values we calculated earlier, at 200 kilometers per hour, the power dissipated due to rolling resistance is 4.60 kilowatts, which is equivalent to nearly 6.5 horsepower. This means that this amount of power is effectively being taken away from the car's available thrust, directly impacting top speed and contributing to higher tire temperatures. It's now clear that toe and rolling resistance are directly linked. A higher toe angle, whether positive or negative, leads to higher rolling resistance, Fr, which in turn causes greater power dissipation, P, reducing overall efficiency and increasing tire wear. Another key factor to consider is how tire pressure affects rolling resistance. The rolling resistance coefficient, CR, is inversely proportional to tire pressure. As pressure increases, the coefficient decreases. To simplify, low pressure, the tire is less inflated, making it more deformable. This increases the contact patch, improving grip, but at the cost of greater tread and carcass deformation, leading to higher temperatures and increased rolling resistance. High pressure, rolling resistance decreases, but with a smaller contact patch, which can compromise grip and make it harder to manage tire temperatures. Optimizing tire pressure is crucial to finding the best balance between efficiency and grip. The ideal pressure depends on the track, weather conditions, and driving style. That's why tire pressure adjustments are one of the most critical setup changes for maximizing a car's overall performance, both in terms of top speed and tire longevity. Before jumping into on-track tests on toe and tire pressures, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated on our latest content. And if you want to share your passion for sim racing, join our Facebook group, Università del SimRacing. Now, with the help of telemetry, it's time to see how different simulators simulate rolling resistance. We'll be testing Assetto Corsa Competizione, Le Mans Ultimate, and Automobilista 2, focusing solely on how and if this physical phenomenon is accurately simulated, without getting into lap times or overall car handling. Let's start with Assetto Corsa Competizione. When it comes to Assetto Corsa Competizione, it's no secret that tire modeling and toe adjustments have always been a complex challenge for the developers, to the point where the topic would deserve a dedicated deep dive. Looking specifically at toe settings, up until patch 1.9, they were almost exclusively used to maximize corner entry rotation, with values often being negative or pushed to the extreme. One unique characteristic of Assetto Corsa Competizione, compared to other simulators, is the relatively narrow range for toe adjustments, which remains consistent across different GT3 models. For example, cars like the Ferrari 296 GT3, Mercedes AMG GT3, and Porsche 992 GT3 all have a toe range from minus 0.4 degrees to plus 0.4 degrees, with only a few rare exceptions. Additionally, the fact that toe values can be adjusted in 0.01 degree increments per click highlights how critical this parameter is within the GT3 setup system and vehicle handling. Taking the McLaren 720S GT3 Evo as a reference, we see a slightly wider adjustment range, reaching plus 0.44 degrees at the front and plus 0.40 degrees at the rear. For this test, we chose Monza, a circuit that, with its long straights, provides a reliable test bed for analyzing the impact of rolling resistance. The first run was conducted with neutral toe settings, set to 0 degrees, while minimizing rear wing angle to reduce aerodynamic drag as much as possible. In the second test, toe settings were maxed out to the highest positive values allowed. At the end of the main straight, the first telemetry reading showed identical top speeds between both setups, with neutral toe in red and max toe in white. This suggests that, at least in this initial phase, rolling resistance is not significantly affected by toe settings. Before braking for the road's chicane, the difference was slightly more noticeable, with the neutral toe setup having a 0.8 kilometers per hour advantage. However, this difference is so minimal that it raises questions about the actual impact of rolling resistance. By the time we reach Ascari, the third telemetry checkpoint, the values are completely even again, with both setups registering 261.5 kilometers per hour. Finally, at the last checkpoint, entering Parabolica, the difference remains insignificant, with the neutral toe setup leading by just 0.5 kilometers per hour, 264.6 kilometers per hour versus 264,3 km на годину. From this initial test, one might incorrectly conclude that rolling resistance is not accounted for in Assetto Corsa Competizione. However, after reviewing the patch 1.9 notes, we can confirm that rolling resistance is indeed implemented and has actually been improved over previous versions, with top speeds increasing by up to 10 kilometers per hour. This strongly suggests that the observed results are likely the outcome of broader changes to the tire model, rather than an absence of rolling resistance altogether. Another limitation of this analysis is related to tire temperatures. Since surface temperatures have never been available in telemetry, a questionable design choice by Kunos, it's impossible to verify whether and how toe adjustments affected tire heating. It's worth making an important distinction here. According to the patch 1.9 notes, the new tire model states that toe influences heat distribution across the three tire sections: inner, center, and outer. However, this doesn't reflect reality, as it's camber that determines heat distribution in both straight line and cornering conditions. In practice, toe generates constant slip angles, causing uniform heat buildup across the entire tire surface, rather than affecting a specific part of the tire, inner, center, or outer. Most likely, the developers had to simplify this aspect to accommodate the limitations of the game's physics engine, finding a compromise for how tires behave. Moving on to Le Mans Ultimate, the tests were once again conducted with a McLaren 720S GT 3 Evo at Monza, using default setups, which featured neutral toe 0 degrees on both axles. Just as in Assetto Corsa Competizione, we reduced the rear wing angle to minimize aerodynamic drag, then maxed out the toe settings to check for differences. At the Curva 1 braking zone, as expected, top speed was slightly higher with neutral toe, but the difference was marginal, only 2 kilometers per hour. Telemetry confirmed this, showing neutral toe data in purple and max toe data in white. However, analyzing the telemetry data more closely, an interesting detail emerged. This difference wasn't necessarily caused by rolling resistance, but rather by improper shift timing. Before shifting into third gear, the max toe setup actually had a slight advantage of plus 0.5 kilometers per hour. However, with each early upshift through to sixth gear, the gap progressively reversed, reaching the final 2 kilometers per hour deficit for the max toe setup. The fact that Le Mans Ultimate appears to completely ignore the physical phenomenon of rolling resistance is further confirmed by the following telemetry data. Up until the early upshift between 4th and 5th gear, where a slight gap starts to form, the recorded speeds are identical between both setups. Even delaying the shift into 6th gear, the delta between the two configurations remains practically unchanged, with a final difference of less than 1 kilometer per hour. Due to a mistake exiting Lesmo 2, which made a direct top speed comparison impossible, we skipped the data collection before Ascari. However, the third reading, taken just before Parabolica, once again confirmed a difference of less than 1 kilometer per hour, excluding variations caused by two different approaches to Ascari, highlighted in the red circle on the telemetry graph. This strongly suggests that the differences observed are due to external factors, and that the developers have not implemented rolling resistance in any way, at least when it comes to toe settings. Later on, we'll see how things change when testing tire pressures. Additional confirmation comes from analyzing the average external tire temperatures, the only available telemetry data, which show minimal variation between the two configurations. Furthermore, using 1 degree of toe is completely unrealistic, as real-world setups typically use small adjustments in the range of tenths of a degree, based on factors such as speed, temperature, tire wear, and vehicle stability. For the Automobilista 2 test, we stayed at Monza, but since the McLaren 720S GT3 Evo has a limited toe adjustment range, 0.1 degrees at the front and 0.9 degrees at the rear, we opted for the Porsche 992 GT3R, which allows for toe values up to plus 1.5 degrees on both axles. Once again, the test was performed with neutral toe 0 degrees first, then with maximum toe plus 1.5 degrees, while completely reducing rear wing angle. The first data collection showed a 3 kilometers per hour advantage for the neutral toe setup. Analyzing telemetry data related to gear shifts, we noticed that out of Parabolica, the driver using neutral toe, purple graph, exited the corner 5 kilometers per hour slower compared to the max toe configuration. This is due to the greater stability of the car with 0 degree toe, allowing for more precise control out of the turn. However, under otherwise identical conditions, the neutral toe setup demonstrated smoother and more consistent acceleration thanks to lower rolling resistance. The delta kept increasing, eventually reaching 3 kilometers per hour with the potential for even greater gains. At the Roggia chicane braking zone, the neutral toe setup maintained its advantage, though this time the difference was only 2 kilometers per hour due to a shorter straight and a lower initial exit speed from the first chicane. Approaching Ascari, an interesting pattern emerged. Despite a poor exit from Lesmo 2, where the driver lost 7 kilometers per hour, the neutral toe setup not only recovered the lost ground, but even increased the gap to 3 kilometers per hour just before braking, 267 kilometers per hour versus 264 km na hodinu. The same trend repeated itself at the Parabolica entry. Despite struggling slightly more out of Ascari, which cost around 2 kilometers per hour, the 0-degree toe setup gradually recovered the deficit and finished the straight with a 2 kilometer per hour lead, registering 269 kilometers per hour versus 267 km/h. The external average tire temperatures showed a significant difference between the two configurations, matching theoretical expectations. So far, Automobilista 2 has proven to be far more convincing in simulating rolling resistance, thanks to a wider range of toe adjustments and a more realistic correlation between toe angles and rolling resistance. The results are perfectly consistent with what would be expected from similar settings. Unlike Le Mans Ultimate and Assetto Corsa Competizione, which appear to completely ignore the effects of rolling resistance. However, it's important to note that this analysis is strictly focused on rolling resistance and not on overall vehicle handling. Now it's time to analyze how tire pressures affect rolling resistance. As a reminder, pressure has a direct impact on rolling resistance. Higher pressures reduce tire deformation, decrease the contact patch, and therefore lower rolling resistance, improving efficiency and increasing top speed. Lower pressures increase the contact patch, but also amplify tire deformation, leading to higher rolling resistance and lower top speeds as a larger portion of the tire drags against the asphalt. As in the previous tests, we start with Assetto Corsa Competizione, setting toe to 0 degrees and tire pressures to the minimum available value, while keeping the rear wing as low as possible to reduce aerodynamic drag. In the second test, the only change is increasing tire pressures to the maximum allowed value. As expected from our toe test conclusions, the new tire model introduced in patch 1.9 correctly influences rolling resistance and top speed based on pressure differences. At the Curva 1 braking zone, the low-pressure setup, red graph, loses almost 3 kilometers per hour compared to the high-pressure setup, white graph. This confirms that Assetto Corsa Competizione properly accounts for rolling resistance changes due to pressure, as well as the amount of rubber in contact with the track. At Roggia, the pattern continues. The high-pressure setup is another 2.4 kilometers per hour faster than the low-pressure one. Approaching Ascari, the difference shrinks to 1.6 kilometers per hour, But by the time we reach Parabolica, the gap widens again, with the high-pressure setup being 2.5 kilometers per hour faster. If Assetto Corsa Competizione showed weak rolling resistance simulation for toe settings, it redeems itself with tire pressures, demonstrating a realistic and well-implemented rolling resistance model. However, there's an important caveat: how pressures are handled by the physics engine. In Assetto Corsa Competizione, the optimal pressure is always 26.64 pounds per square inch, regardless of the car, track, or asphalt temperature. This oversimplification results in an overly basic tire model, somewhat undermining the otherwise accurate rolling resistance simulation. Moving on to Le Mans Ultimate, we use the default setup, which already has the minimum allowable tire pressures, a questionable design choice that raises concerns about the game's overall physics model. Toe is set to 0 degrees, and we then repeat the test with neutral toe and maximum tire pressures. In Le Mans Ultimate, pressures are measured in kilopascals, kPa, ranging from 140 kilopascals, approximately 20.3 pounds per square inch, to 210 kilopascals, approximately 30.46 pounds per square inch. At the first measurement point, at the end of the long main straight, the difference between the two configurations is virtually non-existent, just 0.72 kilometers per hour, an insignificant margin that can't realistically be attributed to higher tire pressures. At the Roja braking zone, the gap increases to 1.64 kilometers per hour, but it's important to note that just 200 meters earlier, at the moment of yet another inefficient upshift, the delta was almost 0.11 kilometers per hour. So once again, the pressure settings cannot be considered a contributing factor in this case either. No surprises in the third measurement, before Ascari, where the differences remain insignificant, once again staying below 1 kilometer per hour in favor of the maximum pressure setup. In the acceleration zone leading to Parabolica, however, a driver error during the low-pressure setup lap resulted in a massive 7 kilometers per hour difference. Interestingly, the high-pressure setup managed to recover almost the entire gap in terms of top speed, but it's hard to determine how much of that was actually due to the reduced contact patch. Given that minimum pressures are already the default setting, the overall impression is that, within this physics model, lower pressure works better. Rather than higher pressures being inefficient for rolling resistance, it seems that low pressures are simply too effective, reducing rolling resistance far more than they realistically should. Essentially, there doesn't seem to be a proper rolling resistance simulation or any real attempt to find an optimal contact patch through pressure adjustments, as would be the case in real life. Instead, the model appears to be entirely focused on carcass temperature management and overall grip, with no direct correlation to rolling resistance. Moving on to Automobilista 2, we once again use the Porsche 992 GT3R. Here, the minimum allowable pressures are 1.4 bar, approximately 20.3 psi, while maximum pressures go up to 2.0 bar, about 29.0 psi. At the first chicane braking zone, the difference is staggering, a 6 km/h advantage in favor of the high-pressure setup. This clearly demonstrates that in Automobilista 2, tire pressures have a significant impact on rolling resistance. In the second measurement, the trend continues, although the difference is less pronounced. 3 km/h in favor of the maximum pressure setup. As mentioned earlier, two key factors come into play here: the lower exit speeds from the first chicane and the length of the following curve section, both of which can influence the results. Even more striking is what happened at the Variante Ascari braking zone. Coming out of Lesmo 2, the driver using the high-pressure setup was 9 km/h slower due to a mistake. However, the downhill section leading to Ascari was enough not only to completely recover the gap, but also to gain an additional 2 km/h in final top speed delta. A similar scenario played out at the exit of Ascari, where the high-pressure setup once again struggled with grip. Despite this, the 4 km/h deficit at the start of the straight toward Parabolica was quickly recovered, with an additional 2 km/h gained in the following section. Now it's time to wrap up this extensive round of testing. Despite some structural differences between the simulators, such as maximum adjustable toe values, how aerodynamic simulation and drag are handled, which may have slightly influenced the results, it's clear that when it comes to rolling resistance simulation, Le Mans Ultimate is the least accurate. The minimal variations caused by toe, especially at higher speeds, and more importantly, the complete lack of difference in relation to tire pressures, which always need to be kept at a minimum for optimal performance, are disappointing, especially given the potential of the title. Assetto Corsa Competizione, on the other hand, performs well in handling pressure changes, thanks to the tire model and rolling resistance adjustments introduced in patch 1.9. However, toe settings remain a weak point, with a handling model that often feels disconnected from real-world behavior. Finally, Automobilista 2, the least mainstream of the three simulators, once again proves the attention to detail that its developers have put into the physics model. While not perfect, each new update introduces notable improvements, further solidifying its position as one of the most refined simulators in terms of physics. That's all for this video. As always, stay tuned for future updates and more content covering the top sim racing titles.